are you guys today? How was your journey in?
Oh, excellent. Yeah, amazing. But this is amazing.
Is this your first time at LSA?
It is, yeah.
That's great. We're very happy to have you here.
As a masterclass tradition, we like to do an icebreaker question. So there are 6 categories: life, deep, experiences, random, if you could, and would you rather.
Kate, would you please do the honours and pick a category for everyone to answer the card and read the card out, please?
What was the hardest decision you ever had to make?
Leaving Denmark, where I'm growing up, and go to the United States, that was really tough decision, because when you're living in a small country like Denmark and going to the United States, it's a totally new world, and it was very scary, but very, very fantastic.
Hello. Toughest decision, maybe to come here? No. It's hard to say. Well, I'll just jump on what you just said. When I started having opportunities to work in America with a movie called Girl with a Pearl Earring, a British movie by Peter Weber with Scarlett Johansson, I was tempted to go to America, but I decided not to, and to stay in Paris, in France. We're all from different countries here, and keep myself away from the temptation that you took. I think that was a hard decision professionally, but I don't regret it.
You know what, it's going to sound boring, but it's the same decision. I'm from Warrington in the Northwest, and at 35 years old, I decided to pack a case and go to Los Angeles. So that was a hard decision. The other one, so I don't sound so copying these guys, is I wanted to be a comic book artist. But then I watched making Michael Jackson's Thriller, and saw makeup effects artist Rick Baker do Michael up as this werewolf, or this cat wolf, I don't know what it is. And so I made the jump from wanting to be a comic book artist to wanting to do makeup effects.
I think, I'm going to do it career related. I, at one point, left the film industry, and my husband, who is now a stills photographer and was a stills photographer on Frankenstein, he got a job. He was a lawyer prior to that, and he got a job in Ottawa, we're Canadian, in the diplomatic corps. And we decided after a year of him putting on a suit and going to a government building and me not working, I started working at the National Theatre Centre, which was great experience for a production designer, building props and doing sets. But after a year of that, I was like, I miss my world of making movies, and I just started working as a production designer, and I was also pregnant with our first child. And we decided to leave this comfortable world of Ottawa and the diplomatic corps to go back to Toronto and work in the film industry. And that was a really tough decision, because the hours are extremely long, and when you're looking to have a family, as some of you know, it's really hard to have a family and a career in film. And we both worked in film in the end, but we managed.
There's been lots of decisions like that, and sometimes I just get paralyzed by having to make a decision, especially when it's personal versus career. But I've been a solo mother most of my life, so making the decisions for her well-being versus what my need is to work has always been a hard decision. So,
thank you so much, guys. They were really good answers.
That was no more of those. We have to organise this, yeah.
So we now have some questions for you. My first question is, Frankenstein is a story Guillermo del Toro has loved for a long time. Can you talk what it's like working with him and how he brings his vision into each of your crafts?
I'll start by saying Guillermo is a big collaborator. I've worked with him for many, many years. I started with Dan when I was still art directing before I moved up to production designing. He's an artist, so from my perspective, he comes with visuals, he draws, he gets people like Guy Davis, his hero concept illustrator, to work before I even start. So when I start a picture with him or a TV show or whatever, there's already a visual, sort of a visual guide. And he's also extremely visually literate. He's a historian, an art historian, a cinephile, and he brings all of that to the table when we're working with him. So it's really enriching and easy in a way.
In terms of what it's like, also he has an open door. His office is in the middle of the art department, so when we try and creep past, he goes, "Kate, Tamara," so you get pulled in. But because he's accessible, there's no excuse to sort of, you can't be an island. So we're always involved in, and aware of as the film's developing and the language is developing, we're all aware of what's happening in each other's worlds, and it's a constant. He dictates the tone of how we work together, and we're almost like lieutenants. So we all understand his language, and then we do the same with our crew, and we are constantly collaborating and checking in with each other. We sort of, it's established. It comes from the top, and he's a wonderful, joyous, sometimes scary, benevolent dictator, and we love him dearly. And he brings great joy as well as the challenges. And he does say with great delight that he wanted this to challenge every one of us, this film, and I think it did. But it's he's a wonderful man to work with.
Guillermo and I met because of our mutual crush on Frankenstein's creation, actually. He wrote to me, he did a lot of sleuth work like Columbo. He found me on an old forum from 10 years ago that he wanted to buy, ironically, Boris Karloff Frankenstein sculpture from me. And so the good thing about Guillermo is he makes you a better artist. He taught me that there's a lot of beauty in imperfection. Because something may be called a monster or a creature or something macabre, it doesn't mean it has to be ugly. It's just people's perception of it. So I don't think there's anyone better than Guillermo to work with. He does make you a better artist. And he's kind of dangerous as well, because Guillermo used to do makeup effects. That's how he started out his career. So I can't pull the wool over his eyes. He knows the techniques as well as I do, if not better sometimes.
I think many things have been said. I think he's the ultimate director because he has this knowledge of art, of literature, of cinema, and I wish every director we work with had that knowledge and that confidence, because and without arrogance. So the great thing is to be able to share about any of these subjects. Could it be a painting or a film? And musically, he really loves music. He likes to sing. He likes music in general, but also, unlike many directors, he likes music in cinema and music in his own films. So it gives me, as a composer, a lot of latitude. I can really fly. Let me, as you said, he challenges me to challenge him. To make him be surprised of what I can come up with as melodies or orchestration, or it's a process that comes after everything is done. So I'm very lucky because I can see the images, the camera movements, the costume, the production design, the creature, and I just have to surf on that. And by having a director who's very benevolent and lets you do that, it's magical.
Movie making is teamwork, and I think he's a fantastic team leader. And he have a very, very strong opinion about everything, but he's very open for everybody's suggestions. And that's where, when he talk about the team, it's like everybody works together for the movie and for him. And he have this, he wants to push everything as far as you can go, and have been that all the time. When I worked together him first time was in '97, I think. That was exactly the same guy. A little bit younger maybe, but you want to push everybody to the edge where everybody's doing as good as you can do that. And he's very open, as I said, very open for suggestions, as opinion, and for the teamwork, and that's the way it should be as a good director. And he's amazing master director. That's a pleasure to be together with him, because he really wants to push you.
So we're going to show a clip of some behind the scenes of Kate's costume work now.
Mike had done a couple of early maquettes for the creature, which were so beautiful, with all those beautiful lines and that pinky red running through it. And that starts informing me about how I can utilize those things within the clothes or costume.
I talked with Kate to see what would emphasize this creature, his length and his height, and his elegance. And Kate is a master at this type of character. So the costume was reflecting the creature's look as well.
A simple coat has taken quite a few weeks of R&D. So the idea was the creature finds his coat in an old burial ground of soldiers from the Crimean War. So we thought it was a beautiful idea to have the imprint of the skeletons on the coat. So we created sort of spines and things. The evolution of this coat goes through a lot of stages and transitions with the journey to the Arctic and his visit to the mill. So every time he's in an environment, qualities of his garment change. We can play with it a bit more.
Yeah, I would leave only the eyes.
Okay. It's interesting because we did months and months of concept work, and then Guillermo is improvising all the time through the process. So your actor comes and it's like you've almost got to let go and see what falls. A lot of your job is sort of reacting to things to support what's happening on set. There's huge collaboration in that.
I mean, that was all very, very, very cool. So when designing for a character, where do you actually begin? Do you begin with like research, context, silhouette, or like the actor themselves?
I begin with the script. That's my Bible, the script and the text of the screenplay. I did read the original novel, of course, but really the guiding force, and whenever I get lost in the process, because you know it's a long process, so is the text, and I will lock myself away. And I think it's really important to treat this moment to be in the world that you're reading for the first time, to capture that feeling for the first time and hold on to it. And you put away the phones and you lock yourself away not to be interrupted. And I read it, and then I sit with it for a few days if I can, and let the subconscious, let images come to mind, or feelings, or textures and colour. And the screenplay that Guillermo had written had so many links back to the novel, but it had its own language. The imagery of religion, of nature, of mythology, all of those things were present. There was a tone and an atmosphere in what he'd written. There was a certain pace and all of those things. So I sit with them and then bubble. And then, you know, Guillermo and I will start talking. And one of the first discussions we had, which leads your research, is what period are we setting it in? So Mary Shelley, you know, wrote this in, I think, 1818 or 1819, but she set it in the 18th century, in the Age of Enlightenment. And the discussion, Guillermo said, I really want to set it in the 1850s, set against the Crimean War, because I want a more modern context to the period that's more relatable. It allows the science of Victor to breathe. We've got the backdrop of the Crimean War where surgery was changing. It allowed Guillermo to explore a sort of a language that he was interested in. And he also, but with that came the caveat that I don't want a sea of black and a monochromatic, because when you think of Victorian, the Victorian world, it's very easy to fall back into a Dickensian sort of Gothic world that we're more familiar with, you know. But he still wanted me to take elements of sort of, you know, paintings of Caspar David Friedrich, so still honour that, but to do it through colour. So colour was a big discussion, and you know how we would explore that as a through line with all my colleagues here, but also in terms of each character having its own identifying colour palette and how we did that. So I'll do that, but I'll also, you know, I do timelines. I do multiple things at once when I start getting into the design process. I don't lock myself in, here's a beginning to end of doing a finished drawing, bugger that, you know, like to keep yourself free. You know, I do lots of gestural drawings. I'll aid it with supporting material from mood boards, which are not necessarily fashion reference, but it's again about the things that identify with the character. I collect objects. You know, it's when I first started collecting images of sort of, you know, insects and things like that, but malachite. And then colours. You know, colour's such a big leading thing, and materiality. So it's a gathering of things. And at the same time as I'm doing that, my crew will start sampling and, you know, experimenting with textures, because we might pursue a route of exploration and with Guillermo, and then it's sort of moving things. So I'm always moving back and forth. And of course, you know, I will work with Guillermo and we'll design a character in a costume, but you have your actor come in, and they're coming in from the outside, and everyone comes with their own vision of what this character would be. So your role also is to really listen to what they're doing, listen to the conversations of what you, the director, and your actor are having, watch how they explore. A lot of my, you know, it was a real understanding in these first fittings that it wasn't just about measuring your actor, it was actually just about listening, watching how they were working, listening to the language. Dan would often be in those initial fittings because it was a conversation. We were developing the language, and those were really precious times, and it just allowed you to, work with each other and to explore things. And I think it's really important. And there's this wonderful thing of ideas being shared and distilled and shaped as you went. And, when you unlock something, then it opens up a whole lot of other ideas. But I try and keep it alive as possible, not get locked into a finished thing. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Speaking of colour, as you mentioned, Kate, Guillermo is also known for his colour signature throughout his sets. Tamara, this question is for you. Can you explain how you use specific colours and colour palettes to guide the audience through the film's narrative?
Well, that's interesting because really it's a question for both Kate and myself and Dan and Mike in many ways, because we're all linked in the color palette. So I think when you watch the film and you see the red, for example, the red is a thread that, like one of Alexandre's notes, carries all the way through the film. So you see that as the signifier of the mother at first, and then it becomes Elizabeth and that relationship that Guillermo wanted to explore between the mother and Elizabeth. So you see the mother when she dies in her white coffin with the red tuft around it. That ruffle relates to Elizabeth's ruffle that Kate used. And, the importance of red, obviously, in the blood and in the lab with the big battery towers that we built and had to carefully explore lighting going from green sort of glass of the period to this red glow, which was Dan's crew and my crew constantly for months trying to light those in that way. And also, yes, the burning angel, we had this angel statue that we carved and created, and then Kate created a costume coming out of that, and that was the whole red theme. The red bed that you see Victor has, which was his mother's bed when he's a child, and then follows him through the story. So that's just red, and that's just a tiny bit of the conversations that we would be having collectively. There's other conversations about how Dan is lighting so that the sets will be shifted to a green tone or to a blue tone, like on the ship, for example, to emphasize the cold Arctic air. Dan would filter or light with more of a blue tone. I'm speaking for Dan, but we're all related. We're all in the same ship, as it were, for the color palette. So, for example, Mike's work on the creature with the translucent kind of his skin, it related in a strange way to the villa where we had marble, where Guillermo and I, one of our initial times together was traveling in Scotland and through the UK where we shot, and finding some of our color palette and our textures there and relating it back to different things. So that, and then the creature cell, I related that to, the bones of the tiles relating to the creature and to Frankenstein's world, and the translucency and the quality of the tiles relating to the creature's skin color. So he's almost blending into this environment.
Did you get that Caravaggio painting? That was a good.
Yeah, the Caravaggio. Yeah, the Caravaggio. Yeah, we look at a lot at paintings. You mentioned Caspar David Friedrich. There's a famous painting that he did of icebergs that became a kind of mantra in terms of the shape, not just the color, to create the icebergs that we built for around the ship. So the color conversations are it's all between all of us, and it happens throughout, and it grows and develops. But I do have to say, for Frankenstein, which was a bit different, we found a lot of that in our first location scouts here in the UK.
Thank you very much.
We're now going to show us some of your behind the scenes tomorrow.
Early on, we were sort of doing this dance of what is our take on Mary Shelley's Frankenstein and what is Guillermo's vision of that. My tendency is to be really real and accurate and historic, and Guillermo is more into the fantasy and pushing the vision. That combination of our two visions together really works. At some point, Guillermo likes to go from the very rough concept to like fully 3D modeled. It has to go from being rooted in fantasy to a little more rooted in reality. And then there's always the question of, well, what's important for Guillermo to have as a built set? Victor's apartment was a must build and one of my favorite sets. It was scripted that it was this impossibly cluttered and crooked set. It was a really beautiful way to start the movie because it was one of our first sets, and it sort of set the tone for what our Frankenstein would be.
Dan, this question is for you. When the production design is really strong and detailed like it is in Frankenstein, how do you decide when to show it clearly, when to hide parts with lighting and framing?
You know, the beauty of light is so powerful. That's the reason it's so important to talk about that together with my fellow people here and with Guillermo, of course, because she has this very strong opinion about the color palette. Because if Kate is designing something in green, and we are lighting that with a very strong blue light, it's going to change 100%. And if we are lighting that with an amber light, it's going to change as well. And it's the same color, the same things with the sets. So the discussions about the color palette is coming from the beginning with Guillermo and the rest of our people, because it's so important to have that feeling from the beginning. If you want to do something powerful with lights, you have to be sure it's going to reflect on the costumes and the sets and the creature as well. And that was our discussions with Guillermo in the beginning. First time we see the young Frankenstein is lit very, very warm light. You know, it's like, oh, he opened the blinders and sunshine is coming into his face and it looks very romantic. And then we are changing the color palettes when it's coming down to the basement and all that. But it's just the discussions about what is that scene, what is the costumes. Because again, everything is worked together. It's like a group of, you know, again, it's teamwork, and I cannot change the color in the middle of a scene because then it's going to change the costume colors, the creature and the sets. So it's a long and very complicated and very important discussions about how to light the scenes. Then because that's reflecting to the way Kate and Tamara is building and costume design that. So it's a very, very important way to work together, because if they're spending a lot of time to find the right dress, you know, we cannot change the color and the light because it's so easy to do it right now. Everybody's LEDs, everything is, it takes a minute to change from red to blue. But of course it changed the whole scene and the whole feeling in the scene. So I think it's, the beauty of Frankenstein is it's coming from Guillermo, but we are working together as a group to find the right expression.
Thank you.
I have a question for Mike now. So speaking on technicalities, what was one of the most technically challenging looks in the film, and how did you tackle that task?
Well, actually, the most challenging one for me really wasn't the creature. I mean, that's a whole other story, but has everyone seen this film? You all saw this, right? Yeah, okay. Well, Mia Goth plays both Elizabeth and Frankenstein's mother, Claire. So I had to change Mia to look a bit more like Oscar, because obviously she's playing his mother. And that was a tricky one because we didn't want the audience to notice. It wasn't that we were hiding Mia, it was just we were making another character, and we didn't want to, you know, make that the focus and make that, oh, look at her, she's in prosthetics. So it had to be very subtle. So that was the most challenging one. If you don't want the audience to notice that it's a makeup. So we did like she has like a forehead and a nose piece, and the forehead we sculpted to look like Oscar's forehead, but a female version, of course. And also, you know, adding a couple of stress lines in her forehead there to really mark that she is in a loveless marriage, she's pregnant, and she's not very well. So all of that actually is subtly in that makeup, and I was very proud of that one, you know, as much as the creature.
That's really cool. We've got another behind-the-scenes clip, and it's your creature design.
Michael is genuinely one of the finest artists I've ever encountered. All I needed to be was the perfect still canvas for him to paint life onto.
When we're doing the makeup process for Jacob's head and hands, it's normally 3 of us. But when we do the full body, there's 5 of us on that. And literally for 9 hours, it's 5 of us constantly going. The full body is actually 42 pieces. And normally with a makeup like this, you can overlap an appliance. So you got a little room for error. But since I broke the makeup up along the actual cuts and stitches where Frankenstein put him together, like a jigsaw puzzle, it's very exacting and takes a little longer to apply, but it looked much more man-made.
Now we're also going to show a clip of Dan in the making of Frankenstein. So,
Laustsen and I went for very theatrical lighting. We said, let's do a single source light, like a window. making it really colorful because we're going to have more colorful costumes and sets.
You know, the ship, everyone was expecting dark navy uniforms. There was a question mark. And Guillermo was very clear, as was Dan, was always how colour was going to read, because what you see to the naked eye is not what you're reading on camera.
I really love the discussions about how to tell the story and how to light the scenes. And, you know, it's just a pleasure to come in here every day and do it. That is amazing when you're working together with a guy like Guillermo because he is so sharp.
If either of us argues anything, we know there's a reason.
We have these great conversations about color palette all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I'm going down on a wild track and you said, oh, no, what about going this way?
Yes.
And you drag me back. And sometimes you do the same and said, should we put a little bit
Of that.
red? And I said, maybe that's going to be too cheesy. It's a very, very respectful.
Oh, with you, it's very effortless.
This is great. It's a good speed.
I think something that we've seen in all of those clips is that there are lots of elements and so many layers to this film. And Alexander, we hear this in the music too, as there's an orchestra, a choir, a church organ, and you brought in an amazing violinist, Elbjørg Kemsing. I hope I'm saying that right. What inspired you to bring all of those elements together in the music?
Well, I think we just saw everything. That's where the inspiration comes from. It's what these people do. Nothing else. I don't listen to music. I don't, read music for what I have to do. I just watch the film. I try to understand the shape of the dramaturgy, and I try to. The more I compose for cinema, the more I'm projecting myself like an actor on the set, trying to be moving with the actors, with this costumes, the light, the camera movements, the sound design, the production design, and trying to exist without showing off. I like my music to be heard, of course, but I'm dancing with them and with the actors, of course. I know I heard some trembling when there was Jacob on the screen. I heard that, huh? Yeah. Okay, yeah. The Russian, yeah. Especially when he was not dressed. What? Sorry. So I do that. I try. Okay, I went too far.
So anyway, so then I tried to find the core of the film. What is the sound? What is the instrumentation? What is the melody or the melodies? And how to develop that. Music is horizontal, something that starts at the beginning of the film and goes that way. But sometimes editing is vertical. But I can't always follow these moments, these cuts and change of angles. So I try and figure out how the music will flow all through the film like another current, coming out, coming in, coming back, and going to the end of the film. And it's very important for me to try and find the color, the instrumental color, to come back to what all these great artists are doing. What is the color of the sound? For example, I would choose a key, the key of G or F or whatever it is, B minor, and depending on what I see and what I feel from the colors I have on the screen, or the fog or the snow. I just feel that moment, that key is right. And then, how do you make this creature bring to the audience
some empathy? He's the force of nature. He's fearless. He's very strong. He's powerful. How do you do? Well, it's already on screen, and I always try. And I think with Guillermo, we like to do that, to find a counterpoint to what is on the screen, to accompany with the music what you see. Well, okay, that's technical, but I have this saying that you need to balance function and fiction. So function is being very efficient to sometimes some action, but then if there's no fiction, there's no imagination. And that's the most difficult, I guess, to find a word of imagination in what you do. And if you write music, is try and find a world that doesn't belong to anyone else but the film you're working on. So, yes, this violin that you just mentioned, this Stradivarius, The creature is a Stradivarius that Dr. Frankenstein wanted to create since he was a kid. So that's his masterpiece. So we took the decision to bring a marvelous violinist with her Stradivarius to play the music that I wrote. And it creates such a pure, delicate, sensitive sound with the melody that I suggested to Guillermo, that you immediately love Jacob Elordi's character. Did I say that? Yes, I said that. Jacob Elordi. Can I say it again? and yes, the audience, you don't have to play the fear, the gore. It's there. You have to create something else. And I think that's what we're all trying to do, actually, to open this story to a world of imagination and bring our own fantasy about it. Is that clear? Good.
As you said, you like people to hear your music, so we're going to play a behind-the-scenes clip.
With Guillermo, there are some scenes where we think maybe there shouldn't be music because the characters deliver their lines and it's fine. We don't need to add more. Or it could be, it's a very rough, violent scene that we see on screen. And if the score is the opposite, it might be better than just adding more of that horror. Sometimes interesting to just find something else to give another dimension. In some very active moments of craziness, when he's building his creature, trying to get a storm and the lightning, I've used many organs that create multi-wave, multi-arpeggio movement, which really amplifies the craziness of the situation. But if you put on top of that the violin, suddenly it's taken in this twister of sounds, and they feel this energy that Guillermo puts in his film, and I try to convey with the music.
What part of the creative process do you think audiences never notice, but each of you care about?
Well, for me, it was the time it took to actually design this creature and come up with him. Guillermo and Kate and I, and well, I guess we all did, apart from obviously, the composer comes last, but, we met over a year and a half before we even started to shoot this movie to find these elements and make Guillermo's world a reality. And for me, I'm probably going off on a tangent, but for me, we obviously had, 100 years of cinema of various Frankenstein creatures that, we didn't want to relate to him. We were a big fan of them, Guillermo and I, but we didn't want to go that way. So for me, it was long, long nights, just like Victor himself, of sitting and trying to come up with something that I figured would, not trying to be different, but just make it plausible in our story. So, Guillermo's very good with me. He lets me do, he trusts me, but what he normally does is tell me what he doesn't want. And what we both didn't want is we didn't want this thing to look like an accident victim. A lot of Frankenstein creatures are very crudely sewn together and garish to look at, but that wasn't Guillermo's movie. And Guillermo's Victor was an artist. It's there in the wardrobe that Kate did. Guillermo says he was trying to make a Porsche, not a Volkswagen. So this creature, and also, Frankenstein has an ego, Victor has an ego. So his son, which he really is, this creature, he wanted it to be, beautiful looking. He was never looking to make a monster. The monster perception is what other people call it, because I think you have to, with a creature like this, the hunters shoot him immediately, and you think, why are they shooting this poor thing? Because I think there's also an aura. If you're in the presence of this dead man, I think it's different. I think there's an aura that comes from him that makes you know that this thing is not of this world or something different. And he was trying to get that across. And that's why we also decided to put, we looked at alabaster statues and stuff because we wanted the creature to have these nice colors and this breakup and these geometric shapes so that, you know that when you look at him, you say, oh no, this is not an accent that's been sewn back together. This has been planned. This has been graphed out by a human. And that was the hard part, again, was to come up with something that we hadn't seen, but looked like it stepped out of an 1800s textbook. That was the trickiest part. And that was months of work of just designing and pencils. And I did 25 different sculptures, little maquettes that Guillermo would like or not like, yada, yada. And just one night, like the Vic himself, one night, that was it. I did one drawing, sent it to Guillermo, and he said, that's it, you got it. And it was very nice. He wrote, I can tell you've been waiting your whole life to do this. It was very sweet, so it was a good moment. And that's Guillermo. He's got these words where he can really push you and make you feel good about what you did, which then inspires you to then stay up the rest of the night and make it even better. So he's very wise like that, and a gentleman like that.
What you want the audience to notice. You know, I think for Frankenstein, one of my little pet peeves for the audience is to know where the fine line between our beautiful visual effects and starts and the production design, the actual build of the set, where those merge. And I think a lot of people make the incorrect assumption that, you know, the ship was, I've heard this, that the ship was, you know, VFX, and it wasn't. We built the ship in its entirety and the ice field around it. And not saying that we did not use visual effects, we were definitely designing with visual effects in mind and like framing the ship. You know, we didn't build the full mast because we had to have truss above for rigging and lights and stunt rigging and all kinds of things. So I think for the audience to realize that everything was so carefully handcrafted and for every set, and where the place of visual effects enhances what we do. So the wide shots, obviously, of the ice field when the ship gets pushed out, which is being pushed out towards the city of Toronto, you know, that visual effects did that so beautifully. But I kind of want the audience to know what we built, and that so much was built. Yes, and it was the ship was actually put on a giant gimbal that we worked out with Guillermo in terms of how much the creature, when a creature pushes it. And then when he pushes it at the end out to the sea, we cut the bow of the ship and just used that on a different special effects system to push out once we had finished all the filming on the main deck of the ship. So, you know, I think that's an important thing for me and for my team, is just to know how much handcrafted wizardry went into this film, and then what visual effects offers up to support us and to embellish.
Speaking as someone who had the ship being built outside her office window, so you know, 6 months of work with a huge crew. It was wonderful seeing that happen. And from my department, you know, we had I had a crew in Toronto. I had satellite people working through Spain and Poland, and then we had a wonderful crew also here in the UK. So we were always working with different teams, but everyone, because it's Guillermo, everyone brought their best and worked, you know, to produce the sort of craft. And I suppose I'd like to say, you know, we have the main characters, which, you know, we loved building and making, but then the background characters, all our crowd scene, they're part of the landscape, they're part of the painting that's created. And we built most of all those costumes. We built, you know, the sailors, the Crimean War, the funerals, the weddings, the soirees, all of that had to have the same expression of love and care when making decisions, that they'd fit the palette, they fitted the language that we were trying to do. So the language of veils and memory extended itself into the background as well, so that we could keep the language going throughout the film. It wasn't that the language stopped and then we were in this world of background. They were part of the overall vision. So all the time, they're an extension of the overall language of the film that we do, just as props is in an extension of the sets and art department. Again, it just ripples through. And I think, you know, when you get down, everybody, every member in every department is aware of the vision, the overall vision that's going. We all share that with them, and they bring things to contribute. And so our crews are again vitally important in every stage. You can do a drawing, but if the material's not right, if your cutter hasn't understood the gesture of the drawing, not what they know but what they see, those things can change the overall outcome. So I'm very reliant on the brilliance and expertise of every member of my crew, and they're chosen because of how they contribute to the language that we're doing.
What you don't see, of course, when you hear the music is the musicians. The many musicians, 19-piece orchestra in a studio here in London, and choir, which is another 60-piece choir. And you just need to feel it. But through the process of recording, you can't just let them do what is on the page. It goes beyond that. And that's something, of course, you can't either hear. It's the interpretation, how you ask the musicians to play your music. It can be played in many different ways, but by asking them, for example, for the strings, not to do too much vibrato, which would be very over-romantic and over schmaltzy. Can you say schmaltzy? Yes, schmaltzy. It allows the music to be very pure and very true. And I would say, that's the unspoken moment of the recording, and what you hear is that relationship between me as a conductor to give to the marvelous musicians direction that will make the music exact for what the movie is asking for, and not, again, being heard in the wrong way, but just be part of the process, the whole process.
The camera is the most important thing on the film set, because all those people's works, if we don't capture that correctly, it's not worth it. So we are spending a lot of time to find the right camera, the right lenses, together with Guillermo and together with everybody else, because we're doing a lot of tests. But if you don't capture the images, the sets, and the costumes and the monster in the right way, everything is just wasting the time. So we are spending a lot of time to find the right lenses, the right cameras, together with Guillermo, of course, and the light again. But what people doesn't know or see is like what you're doing, what the camera is capturing, because there's so many different ways to do that. So, and Guillermo has this amazing eye again. So we just spend a lot of time to test wardrobe and test costumes and test the sets, because the color palette is so important for this. But if you don't do that with the right camera, the right lenses, and the right diffusion filters, we're spending a lot of time to find the right diffusion filters, because if you don't use that, we think the image is getting too sharp, and that's not to take the poesy away. So the hidden things is like finding the right lenses and cameras for the movie, whatever movie it is, but especially here in Frankenstein, we shot a large format to find these like poetic images.
Thank you so much, guys. That's all the questions we have for you today. We're going to pass it to the audience. I think we've only got time for one, maybe two audience questions, but Charity is going to come around with the mic and throw it at you. So.
I've got a question for Dan. So when you mentioned color palettes and lighting a set and everything, what would you say is your favorite color to light with in terms of the mood that it produces along with the whole of the piece?
I don't think there's one single color, it's again coming from, when you start a movie with Guillermo, he's making this mood boards, where every scene is like, where every set is like, I think we should go that and that way. But we like, our whole history is amber and steel blue. I don't know, we try to get away from that, all the movies we have done together. This is the 5th movie I've done with him. So our night is steel blue, and on this one, we want to have a lot of torches and sunset and sunrise. So the combination here is like steel blue and amber. And what we do a lot of times is like we have this contrast color. So for example, on the ship, the torches is the key light, but the steel blue is a moonlight. And of course, that's so important to make those tests so the costumes and the sets is coming out right. But that is our color palette. We like that a lot. And I think it's a very very colorful and very powerful combination for Frankenstein.
Thank you very much. How would you advise us, like young wannabe art directors, to sort of like try and develop our skills so we can like better our craft and things like that?
You know, I think becoming visually literate and just opening yourself to everything visually you can get your hands on, and by that I mean not just going on the internet and doing research. I'm talking about going to museums, travel if you can, open your world, look at a lot of films, read a lot of books, look at things, learn to look at the macro and the micro. I mean, I think that's very important. When I do a project, I'm always looking at the big proscenium picture, but I'm also knowing, especially with somebody like Guillermo, that he's going to do a tight close-up on things. So you really have to be aware of that. Networking when you start, getting any kind of production training you can get. I think people in the art department, a lot of people I work with, my trusted team who are amazing, don't get the chance to be on set. So getting on set is really important, because when you're designing, it's important to know that it's not just what you see on the screen. There's a whole crew there, and sometimes that can be hundreds of people, and you have to accommodate them, making sets where the walls move out, they wild. All of those kinds of magical things that are part of movie making and design are really important.
I just wanted to ask, what things has working on Frankenstein taught you about your own craft, like to all of you in general?
Sorry, what was the question again?
What has working on Frankenstein taught you about your own craft?
Oh, okay, you start.
Yeah, I think it's that to really listen. You know, it's about communication. A lot of what we do, communication between each other with our director. You know, we can hold on to things sometimes through fear, and it's called get over it. And you know, really on this one particularly, listening to what my actors were trying to communicate about their thoughts and feelings of their character, and being open to that. You know, you can guide them along, but being open. And I suppose I just stood back for a moment and really listened and watched to what everybody was doing, because I'm usually like a bull at a gate. So it's been a big lesson, and I think it's better for it. It's about the collaboration. You can't be an island. And I have a lot of love for my colleagues that are here, so we communicate a lot and support each other. And you need to have that trust and relationship, which comes from listening to each other and each other's points of view. Mike and I were always doing that with the creature, you know, hearing where the ideas came from, so that, you know, that was supported throughout. So it's the biggest thing is to really listen.
I mean, what she said. I mean, I think also research, which I already mentioned, and opening yourself. Like for us, I think, and Dan has left, but every frame that we're creating is like a painting, and we look at art history and we look at paintings and we actually draw from that. So I think that was, for me, a really important, you know, the craft of thinking of it in terms of making a painting.
And reinterpreting those paintings.
And reinterpreting, absolutely.
So it's not the Google research, you know, it's not like I'm going to copy and paste. That's something I'd really urge you to all, you know, reinterpret. How do you know, often we take ideas that are present, but we go, well, how does that work in this world? And that's what Guillermo's always interested in. How do we take imagery and then make it our own? And, you know, so nothing's just copy and paste.
And frankly, you've probably heard this, Guillermo say this, fuck AI. And by that, you know, we stand by that, you know, we can't.
Yes.
I can get away with dropping the F-bomb because I'm quoting Guillermo. But we stand by that, and I think that's really important, especially for you guys, because you're facing this tidal wave of AI. And just keep in mind, it's a tool. You can use it if you like, but do not make it take over from your human experience, your emotion, your human emotion. That's where we draw our craft from.
Well, for me, I guess we all at one point, I'm a bit of a loner making the creature. But what this movie taught me is, you know, you think you're the king of the world, you're making remaking the Frankenstein monster, but then you go in Toronto and you go into a car park And this person has built a whole ship, and you suddenly brings you down and say, and then you walk into Kate's area, and these thousands of ornate costumes that you could have never dreamed up. I don't know where she gets it from. So I think it's that you feel like a bit of an imposter working with these giants, and oh yeah, well you didn't say it though. I said yeah. No, but seriously, so I think it's teamwork that I learned on this movie more than any other movie. And like, again, working with Kate is, the creature had to look tall and powerful. So it's not just what I do to his face, his structure. Kate then makes a coat that lengthens him and makes it romantic, even though it's a putrefied old jacket that he found in the woods. But Kate makes it elegant and romantic. And again, seeing that ship and when you walked in the lab that Tamara had built, you were in a lab. It was totally It was totally convincing in that lab, and you couldn't help be part of Frankenstein's world. So I learned teamwork a lot on this movie.
The challenge is that this film is it's a trilogy: Shape of Water, Pinocchio, and Frankenstein. It's Guillermo's trilogy of creature, and this one was the grand finale. And I had to find a way of not repeating myself from the two previous movies. And as you saw in the film, there are some very intimate moments and some huge, gigantic, scenes. And the music had to be able to do that, go from very, very, very small to huge. And I guess that was the thing I learned from Frankenstein. Yeah. That's it.